This podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box to this episode. Patreon is a monthly subscription and you can cancel anytime. And PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.
David Daoud, research analyst on Lebanon and Hezbollah at United Against Nuclear Iran. This is not a political revolution. Politics are not ranking high on there. People they want food, they want jobs, they want electricity, they want basic things, basic needs, and they're not concerned with who's running the country. I think if the way I see it, and this is perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, if Iran's stooges or Russia's stooges or whomever's stooges were running the country but were able to provide these basic needs, we wouldn't have had this uprising. So it's where it's too similar, I think, is in the disorganization, and I don't necessarily see that it's going to go anywhere. I mean, we saw these upheavals. I don't know how this compares in terms of numbers. It's pretty comparable to the Cedar Revolution, but that also fizzled out pretty quickly. And you could start to see the strands fraying in the Cedar Revolution from the outset, with Aoun returning to Lebanon. And in some ways, you could say that it was disorganized as well, right? There, you did have more organized groups within this broader movement, but that overall Cedar Revolution movement was disorganized. This is all the more so. And without that organization, without anything beyond, 50,000-foot principles, how can you move something forward?
I like that you bring up disorganization at the beginning, because from most of my conversations that I've had, the disorganization of the moment is usually brought out as a positive factor, in the sense that it is relatively fluid. You don't have the usual leadership components, and in a way that seems to be, it could be interpreted as a strength, that you can't really just target individuals now. This is a population uprising. But I like also that you're hinting at something else, which is translating the fluidity into something structural. Is that something that you see as a inevitable consequence to this moment, that which you described, the economic fuel that is unusual in terms of the momentum, leading to structural changes? Do you see that the structure is not there?
Within the protest movement? Within this
current protest movement, yeah.
I think there are very broad ideas. Right? I get the perspective that says, this movement, this uprising clearly has enemies, and therefore it's to its benefit. It doesn't have a targetable figure that if you can decapitate, it doesn't have its Bashir Jmail, it doesn't have its Rafiq Hariri. I can sympathize with that up to a certain point, but it doesn't have concrete ideas. I think the protester in Beirut and the protester in Nabatiyya and the protester in Tripoli, they're united by these very basic generalities. But if you're trying to translate this into something actionable, which is where I think they would like to see it go. What happens when you sit down to the table? From Elif from Beirut, Hassan from Nabatiyya, and Omar from Trablus, and you sit there and you try to talk to each other. And once you dig down from we want to reform the judiciary, for example, what does that mean, right? Or we want to rebuild infrastructure. Where does the emphasis go, right? Do we rebuild Beirut? Do we rebuild tourist infrastructure? Once you want to sit there and get down to brass tacks, I distrust slogans, right? I distrust movements built on what I think are superficial slogans.
Can I just interject
please
here?
Go ahead.
Would you include killun, killun?
Yes, absolutely.
Really? So you are the first person to say that.
Because I've seen that, how it's borne out, specifically in terms of Hezbollah. So I actually wrote a piece for Atlantic Council on how this uprising isn't a threat to Hezbollah. Not in the way that it's been portrayed. It's not going to tear them down. It's not going to disarm them. Perhaps it shakes things up. But there were many in the streets who were saying Killun Killun, except for Nasrallah. Or Killun Killun, and then we need someone like Bashir Jmail. Well, Bashir Ismail is part of the problem.
And you also heard Nasrallah Wahad Minna.
Of course.
So there was that too.
There was. I'm not denying that existed, but I'm saying that there wasn't that unanimity in saying we want this old system gone. Nasrallah, Bashir. I know Bashir is no longer alive, but he's still a symbol of something that I think. Look, I also don't place Lebanon's degeneration at 1991. I think this failure is inherent in the system back from 1946, 1943. The sectarianism that was always there, the patronage systems. Yeah, it kind of, the Civil War and the collapse of the old order and the restructuring in 1991 kind of brought that to the fore and let the current criminals pick up. But these strands were always there. So Bashir is part of the problem, right? The Jamails are part of the problem. So to hear someone saying, Killon yani Killon, but we need a leader like Bashir. No, you need an anti-Bashir. You need an anti-Nasrallah.
So you see that these... I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I'm going to assume you mean that this is an inherent flaw in the way Lebanon is built.
Yes.
And that it goes deeper than just a... it's not just a sectarian issue, it's a Lebanese problem.
Yes.
In that sense, looking at the positivity of what we saw, at least in October, did you get the feeling from watching events from Washington that foundation was shaking? That a different Lebanon was on the horizon and didn't reach its goal? Or is it simply an impossible feat?
I mean, I don't know if it's impossible. I think, look, there are two parts to that, two answers to that question. The first part I'd say is that identities take time to build. Like many other Middle Eastern identities, Lebanese is not an organic, natural identity. I mean, historically, right? What is Lebanon? Is it an Arab country? Is it Phoenician? Is it Western? That's what led to the original civil war. That inability to kind of, for Lebanon to figure itself out, to figure out a unified identity, that almost cognitive dissonance in being Lebanese never went away. And I think post-Civil War, you heard a lot of people talk against, sectarianism, talk against Ta'ifiyya, but where's it gotten anyone in the past? It's been 30 years, right? And things haven't changed. Right now, I think people are talking in the heat of the moment. But then when you push them a little bit, you see that old sectarianism come back very quickly. Because, again, I'm not saying it's impossible for a Lebanese identity to emerge, but it's going to take a lot more than some angry people in the streets. And
yeah, but that's actually, it's a very almost like you're cautiously pessimistic in a way.
Yes, I am.
And I want to get a little deeper into what you're saying. In that sense, then, at least the weekend after October 17, so those 3 days, was that in the mix?
The anti-sectarianism?
Not the anti-sectarian, more what you're describing, this
burgeoning of maybe a seed was planted.
A seed was planted. Okay.
Perhaps. I mean, I think it's too soon to tell. Neither of us are, have a crystal ball to look into the future, or it could just be slogans. And this is, maybe this is just my inherent distrust of impassioned slogans. People say things in the heat of the moment. Right. But then I think we can look at a kind of a test case for this in the appointment of Hassan Diab as prime minister. Well, first of all, if you're all post-sectarian, why are you insisting on someone who's, the most legitimate Sunni? Right? The objection to Hassan Diab was, well, he doesn't have Sunni support. And we heard this from protesters. We heard them from the, when I use a term that's kind of loaded, but they're Amen Corner here in the United States.
Amen Corner?
The Amen Corner.
What is that?
The big, the raucous supporters. Okay,
I haven't heard this.
The ones who are looking at the protests with like this rosy-eyed vision that I think is not justified by the data, by the facts on the ground, even if you have optimism. But why not the most qualified person? Why not call for a Shia or a Sunni or anyone who is the most qualified person if you are so post-sectarian all of a sudden? And that was, I think, the first test case. And Diab, I think he should have been rejected, but I don't think he should have been rejected on those grounds.
So you saw the protesters rejecting him on the old ways?
Yes.
Less to do with his competence, more to do with he's not Sunni.
Well, but the fact that factors, I think there were...
Oh, the fact that it's even there.
The fact that it's even there. Yes. How are you post-sectarian? This is still...
Yes, right.
And your alternative is also, Nawaf Islam is also a Sunni, right? It's not like they put forward someone who was from whatever sect, a Druze, whatever, but this is the most qualified person in the country.
I see what you're saying. So in other words, a a moment of truth.
Yes.
You would expect the Lebanese to literally overcome.
But assuming this is what they're saying,
Right.
مبادنا طائفية, we don't want sectarianism. Well,
Yeah. But then let me ask you then, is okay, that I think what I'm getting from you is that that's a real revolution, that you upend the old order and usher in something new. Are there baby steps to that process? In other words, reforming the system from within.
Sure.
And what you're describing, a post-sectarian order, could emerge one day, but that perhaps that takes time. Because I like what you're saying. You're describing these two figures, both Sunnis at the end of the day. And I don't think the protesters even considered an alternative to a Sunni representative. I don't think, though, that they're doing that out of sectarian precaution. I think that is just that
it's something ingrained. It's something built in almost.
and it's so old and it's so lethargic, and that it's almost impossible to imagine that fading from view so quickly.
So I wholeheartily agree with you. I think, look, any change that happens in any society, for it to be organic, has to be gradual. I don't believe in tearing down even, it might come off, but even bad systems, right? We've seen this with the Arab Spring. If you want to compare it to, I was an Arab Spring skeptic from day one. I remember sitting in my law school class and reading the news and, people in Tahrir Square in Egypt and then, in Tunisia. And I'm like, this is not going to go anywhere. And not that I'm a prophet or anything, but that bore out because I have a sense that change can't come that way. You have to be accustomed to something, right? If we take this as an example, if you are saying, well, we want to be post-sectarian, we want to be non-sectarian, but you have no reference point. Like your only reference point in your mind, you can say it, but in your mind, it's that, just as you mentioned, this natural instinctive reaction almost.
So then you're but you're expecting a societal change with it, not just a political.
Well, if that is a revolution, that is to tear. If we are to take the protesters at face value, if we are to take the slogans at face value, they are saying this is the sea change. This is going to change everything. The old order died on October 17th. We are now in the beginning of a new Lebanon. Well, fine. But it's not, and here's how we're seeing this.
Right.
In the calls for a new Bashir, in the calls for a more Sunni prime minister, that they're not living up to their slogans. For those slogans to ever be realized, if they will be, that, like as you mentioned, it has to happen organically. It has to happen from within the system. I don't know how long that would take.
And then taking that one step further, what are the obstacles to to actually achieve that goal? Because there's an expectation that the people that went to the streets were expecting something new.
Sure.
It wasn't just let's chip a bit and get some cosmetic changes. I really think this was a opting out of something that doesn't work and trying at least to get something new. What are the obstacles to that?
There are many obstacles. I think part of it is the protesters themselves. What do they actually want? Right? They have. I mean, I remember the early days of the uprising. Robert Fadl, who's not exactly a part of the protest movement, but he's kind of posited himself as a spokesperson, and he's been in their meetings and all that. Right? He was in Martyr Square, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. This is at the beginning.
And there's like a little, a makeshift tent that was put in. He read out like some points that what the protesters want.
Yeah.
They were again, this is back to the generality. Well, the points that he made could mean anything when you get down to brass tacks. And so if they can't figure out what they want, if they don't have a committee, something, what are you offering as the alternative beyond slogans? You can't run a country on slogans. Yeah. And I saw a website that came up more recently. I think it had 6 points. I'm blanking on the name of it now, but again, it was 6 very general points. There wasn't some kind of manifesto. So what is the change you want to bring about beyond?
But then what should a protester who, let's say, agrees with what you're saying, which is, yes, there should be a new order, and this is not something cosmetic. Is it simply pushing through with early elections? Is it I think what you're describing is get a political party together? Is it kind of the usual ways we understand politics that they should organize and deliver? Or is there something that they're trying to avoid, which is this has been tried in the past and these moments fizzle out? And that, in a sense, that leaderless thing that which you're describing is in itself a way to circumvent the old problems that most Lebanese end up stuck in. Among that is the sectarian politics that we know.
But then how do you get the change in place? If how do you get your politicians? Do they want politicians in power? Like, this goes more to the point, right?
Yeah.
Do they want people working from within the system at all? Do they want people in parliament? Do they want ministers in the government? If not, what is their vehicle for change?
Yeah.
Staying in the streets, chanting. It's like, what's that saying? A dog who's chasing a car and then he catches it. Well, he doesn't know what to do with it. This is the way I see it. In that, fine, let's say Aoun resigns and Birre puts himself in jail. The entire political class goes away. And we'll get to where this political class came from in a second if you want, but then what? They're gone. How do you implement change? Do you take over the vehicles of government that exist? Do you want your people in parliament and the cabinet and the presidency? We haven't heard that. Are you imagining an entirely new order, an entirely new constitutional order?
Yeah.
Do you want to do away with Taif?
Right.
And where is your vehicle?
So that should be from the get-go.
Yes. I think there should be some kind of at least a committee or something. If they don't want a single leader who could be decapitated, have a diffuse leadership, something, at least some kind of ongoing dialogue. And I hear there is dialogue, going between the different centers of gravity of the protest movement. But are they just turning into another, Occupy Wall Street? And that didn't entirely die out, right? And that we still feel, I think, the rage of Occupy Wall Street, say, in our politics.
Yes.
I think a lot of it contributes, say, to the popularity of someone like Bernie.
Sure.
So I could see the Lebanese uprising go that way, and that it injects something, a new strain into the Lebanese political conversation. But is it something that's going to win over so many people? Is it something that's going to rally the people? Is it something that's going to have realistic policy proposals, and not just realistic policy proposals, but a realistic plan of how to get there?
Right. So there is a disappointment in a way, I think, from what you're saying, that even with the most well-intentioned protester, the way Lebanon has been set up long ago is as relevant today as it was 70 years ago.
Yes.
And because of that, in 2020, it's still difficult to see a domestic change happen, even when there's domestic pressure, and the most domestic pressure we've ever seen.
Yes.
I mean, these are...
Look, I'm not denying the numbers, right? I'm not denying the...
Sure, and there still is a genuine challenge to authority.
Sure.
So that is something.
But it's unfocused, and that's where I think that...
And it's unfocused because the Lebanese intercommunal arrangement in itself encourages that. Encourages a sort of... not one group can overwhelm.
Sure.
And that's part of it. Am I getting that right?
Well, in some sense, where I'm looking at it is you have, this great ball of energy that's kind of shooting off in all types of directions against a political establishment that, for all of its disagreements, seems to have coalesced.
Right.
And is now trying to preserve the order.
Yes.
Because preserving that order means, if we're going to look at the most base, right, staying out of jail in a lot of cases. That's add on top of all the the benefits they get from just having the order as it is. I don't think you can combat something that's first of all that organized with that much with institutions that go back decades, whether they're good or bad institutions. They're institutions meant to support that old political order, to support these individual component parties, with all that experience, with all with everything that they have, with anger and slogans and the passion. Yeah, I'm not denying the passion. But that's not enough.
So, okay, but that's okay. Let's say, and it's obvious in Lebanon, it's never just a domestic story.
Of course.
There's at least two layers to the story. And you sense there's an inevitable doom to the moment within.
Yes.
Let's give them the benefit of the doubt that it's only been 5 months and that things are still fluid on the ground. But that disappointment aside, do you see the same level of disappointment on the sort of the top-down issue? Not top-down within Lebanon. I'm talking about regional,
Sure.
international engagement with Lebanon at this moment. When you describe the March 2005 protests, and I look back on those protests, it seemed to be both in equal measure. There was an international appreciation or serious hesitation with what was happening on the streets. This time around, it almost seems like a universal reluctance.
Yes.
And is that part of the disappointment to you that even if the domestic issue, let's say, were to be more favorable to change, that there's really no appetite for engagement at this point in time from abroad?
You're saying my personal disappointment. Do I view that as a bad thing?
From your own, yes, because I mean, whether it's regional actors
Sure.
or it could even be, I mean, beyond America, let's just say the IMF itself, right? That the engagement component is just not really. Other than the IMF, I don't think there's any.
There's no one.
There's no one.
Some of the French have said some things that there have been like anonymous Europeans. Look, I mean, for me, I'm someone who says that in the wake of the Cedar Revolution, we didn't engage enough. Right. That again,
we being the
United States,
US,
particularly, and the international community as well. Again, you had a similar dynamic where you had a dictatorship, Syria, occupying this country for 35 years, quashing any type of political movement or any type of political voice that could stand up to its hegemony.
Yes.
This hegemony dies overnight, and you have these basically babies, right? These political babies. In some cases, really like Saad Hariri, and I don't mean that as an insult, in that this job was thrust upon him, going up against this well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
And they had the power, they had the verve. So in that moment, they needed more guidance. They needed more engagement. At this moment in time, now with that in mind, that's my perspective. In this moment in time, I think we've seen so much disappointment from Lebanon. We've seen so much excuses, right? Where we hear, Lebanon's special circumstances all the time. And this often acts as carte blanche for inaction on the political leadership. Yeah. And then we see so there's, leading up to this moment, even before October 17th, there was this resignation that Lebanon is what it is. You look at this protest movement, which I think for a moment may have given people cause to reflect. Well, maybe the political order, get rid of Hariri, get rid of Jaja, get rid of all of them. Let's work with the people. But then the people seem as if they're also as equally ineffective. So I think in this moment, I wouldn't advocate engagement. I would say we need to wait and see. Not only that, how does this shake out? Does this shake out as an American, right? If I'm looking at this strictly from a U.S. foreign policy perspective, from our interests, and I think that engagement with Lebanon is critical to our interests. But what if this protest movement goes in a very anti-American direction? Because we don't know its politics. And I worry about that. Do we want to back something that ultimately could, Lebanon will be more prosperous and all that, but it'll be a more anti-American Lebanon. And there have been anti-American strains within this protest movement. After the peace deal, the Trump peace deal was revealed, for example, the protest tent in Nabatieh set up, an Israeli and American flag outside, and you had people stomping on it. And, these aren't the Hezbollah, these are supposed to be the anti-Hezbollah guys in Nabatieh. So I think...
But the two don't necessarily line up that way in Lebanon, that you can have a challenge to Hezbollah, and the same person can also despise Israel.
No, sure. Look, I understand the sentiments regarding Israel.
Or criticize the Trump peace plan. And
criticism is one thing, I think, but if this revolution takes on a distinctly anti-American orientation...
then it's harder for the Americans
Yes, as it should be. As it should be. We don't want to empower another problem element for us in the region. If it goes that way and it's Lebanon's own independent position, that's one thing. I don't know if we should be bankrolling it. And that's aside from the effectiveness, right? If we pump money into this, if we pump money, and we have put money and we have put backing into civil society groups in the past, and we've seen very little for our return. So I would actually advise caution now, because I'm so disappointed in Lebanon's inability to kind of pull itself up by its bootstraps.
So even in that sense, you would need the domestic factors to at least begin for the Americans to have someone to talk to.
I think we can't go to the American government and build confidence without that. Well, what do we, if I'm going to propose a business deal to you, I have to show you facts and numbers and data. We have so little when it comes to the protest movement.
In that sense, the Lebanese are really on their own for the first time in a long time.
Yes, and I think it's a healthy thing.
It's exactly. I was going to get to that if they get it wrong,
it's on them.
Yeah, and if they get it right,
then good for them as well. And
yeah.
I think the world will be there to back them, and I think we
Yes.
should be if they get it right. But
Right.
look, I think this is part of what goes to, I guess, the heart of the problem. It's not just the way Lebanon was structured. There's something societal that I think is amiss,
Yeah.
something wrong, cultural, if I may.
Yeah.
In that, these leaders, as I keep telling people, they didn't come from Mars, right? They weren't imposed on them by anyone. You change up the electoral laws, you still get the same leaders. Well, who's voting? And they're all like the last election round. There were alternatives, and people either chose to stay home, and in large numbers they did stay home, or they chose to vote for the same old people. So you've been empowering these people for so long. You the people in the streets, you've been empowering them for so long, and either through your silence or through your active support. You need to figure out what it is that's led you to do that, because you were okay with the system so long as it worked for you. It's only now that it's hurting you that you're not okay with it. That needs to change as well.
Yeah.
And I think Lebanon being on its own will create a sense of, I guess, self-responsibility, self-accountability to say, well, maybe we're part of the problem as well.
And that is what's happening on the street, at least domestically, where protesters are challenging the state, and the state sometimes, in recent weeks, is responding.
But in some ways, I think that's more of the old. In that, what I'm saying is that not just the Lebanese have had a tendency. You look at the Civil War. It was not the Lebanese fault, right? It was Israel's fault. It was America's fault. It was always outside factors. Every problem has always been an outside factor. I think that same mentality, the protesters are saying, well, no, it's not the protesters' fault. It's the politicians. It's the system's fault. We are the innocent people. They've been the ones. These leaders, this political class has been the one to impose all this misery upon us. Except you live in a symbiotic system. Without your support for so long, they could not have existed. They could not have reached the power that they do now. And that introspection within the protest movement, forget Basil, forget On, forget everyone. Don't curse out Basil's mother. Curse out yourself, too, because you've been part of the problem as well. Each individual protester.
And that problem is the sectarian nature of Lebanon? I think that people cannot overcome.
I don't know if that's the sectarian nature of Lebanon. I think that's a pan-sectarian problem in Lebanon. That's
pan-sectarian.
In that I think there has been perhaps because Lebanon has been helped along at all phases in its history by outside powers, there's been perhaps a mentality of kicking the bucket down the road, relegating responsibility to someone else.
Yeah.
Lebanon being on its own now will cause this introspection, I think, within the protest movement to say, how have we, each individual Lebanese, contributed to the downfall of Lebanon as well?
It's almost like an individual introspection here.
I think it's necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, every society is ultimately comprised of individuals, and the individual who dumps garbage in the street or who runs an electricity moteur, and runs basically an electricity mafia in his neighborhood, you're also contributing to the damage of the system. Each one of those individual things, each person that doesn't pay his taxes or hid behind a zaim or something, I would venture to say that most of these Lebanese in the street have done that in one way or another. They've been part of this overall problem. They've been part of this issue in one way, contributing to it one way or another. This introspection is going to be necessary before they move forward in a way that they can build a healthy country.
I like seeing what you're describing, and if you look at it almost like a micro analysis,
yes.
You see the guy in the Corniche throwing his Pepsi can into the beach, just tossing it out, and you can't really blame geopolitics or sectarianism on that.
No, that's you. That's individual. Yeah,
right. Parallel parking and blocking traffic for 2 hours
and just going to get your coffee or whatever.
Coffee, and assuming that everyone else
doesn't have a life. Yeah.
No, worse. It's their fault for lining up. That is a purely. I mean, that is a very micro level analysis of definitely individual responsibility, which is not there. Going to the macro, at least on a political level, when you said these politicians did not come from Mars,
yes,
the politicians that are functioning today or dysfunctioning, whatever the word is, malfunctioning, that they are in a way protecting a big problem within the state that does not allow for state reform. I'm just going to gauge your mind here. Do you see it's Hezbollah today, it could be another group in the future? Other groups have existed. I mean, it's not a
It's not a
Hezbollah particular.
Hezbollah is a symptom. I don't think Hezbollah is the...
A sub-state group that is at least able to maneuver the state for its own reasons. That usually is defense.
Sure.
That's security. That the politicians that are available today are either directly or indirectly a consequence of that arrangement, which is really the post-war order.
Sure.
Whether it's Syria or today it's indirectly vis-a-vis Iran. The protesters are really facing an insurmountable problem, which is, it goes beyond taxation.
Sure.
It goes beyond municipal issues. That this is a very serious domestic thing that is beyond their control. Does that factor into at least the changes that one would expect to come out of the protest movement?
I think there is a lot that is outside of their control. There's also a lot that's within. You know, this I actually say this with regards to, say, support for the LAF, and I'll analogize there, in that, you know, let's say the maximum of what the LAF can do or should be expected to do, implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, disarm Hezbollah, the whole thing.
Well, it's not in the 1701. It doesn't say disarm Hezbollah.
Well, it doesn't say disarm Hezbollah. It says disarm armed groups that aren't part of the state.
No, it says no weapons.
But it also says beneath the litany. But it also talks about disarming. There are two parts of it, and it references 1559.
I with the understanding, not that I'm supporting this, with the understanding that Hezbollah is not factored in. So that's the Lebanese state's definition of...
Sure.
Yeah.
I think the international community would disagree on that definition.
Of course, yeah. But going into that...
But taking that as an example, let's say that's the bar.
Yeah.
And we realize, I think we should realize, you know, that's an unrealistic bar at this juncture, at this moment in time. We shouldn't push the LAF to move to disarm Hezbollah. Right. Accepting that this is what UN Security Council resolution says, we shouldn't at this moment in time push the LAF to disarm Hezbollah in one fell swoop, because it will
it's just
the backlash would be worse than the action. But you know, if we're going to say this is the top thing that the LAF can do, but the LAF is all the way here at the bottom, right? There's this big gap where the LAF is not acting, I guess, to fulfill these duties that, you know, that are short of doing that. That it can do so much more with what it has now.
Yeah.
And I think the same works for, you know, you're talking about these insurmountable odds. Well, if we're going to create an analogy, fine, that's the high bar. Right? But there's
even soldiers on the Syrian border. Something basic. Yeah.
But for the people, right, you have this high bar. You might not be able to change everything. You might not be able to end Iranian influence or whomever's influence over your country, the stranglehold that Lebanon's in. But that's not carte blanche for inaction, right? There's so much more you still can do between the 0 you're at and, you know, the 100 that is, you know, ending this foreign domination. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Actually try to do something. And then once the international community sees that, fine, the Lebanese are actually serious this time, this isn't like any of the countless numbers of times that we've pumped money into the government or movements or whatever, then you'll see a different reaction from the international community. And that'll probably help, you know, bridge that final gap to be able to kind of create an independent Lebanon.
So in that sense, the answers remain in Lebanon.
The answers must always start in Lebanon.
Is there any validation, the argument where we're seeing regional unrest and we're seeing protesters demanding economic dignity, and also perhaps indirectly calling on the end of this arrangement, which sees Iran's hegemony, at least through its proxy militia, at being challenged on the streets? Is there any credence to the solutions are in Iran? Iranian protesters pushing in that direction alleviates Lebanese issues? Or is it, and I mean this in the, is it a, beyond that, no, the Lebanese still need to...
Look, at ultimately...
Like, in other words, what you're describing...
If the head, you're saying if the head of the snake is cut off in Iran, is it
not even that, like what you're describing, the Lebanese army has full sovereignty over Lebanese borders. I mean, like any army.
Like any normal country,
the way Lebanese army was at least thought through it in its inception. That is only possible when you have an Iranian domestic challenge to their regime.
I don't think so. I don't think it's entirely, no. And I think notwithstanding what's going on in Iran. I think, look, there's been a coincidence in time of the protests in Iraq, then Lebanon, then Iran, then I guess Iraq again, kind of. And that created a linkage in people's minds that I think is inaccurate. I think these countries are each doing, these protesters in each country are looking after their own interest.
Right.
Even someone like Samir Jaja, who would love the opportunity, I guess, to end Iranian dominance, he's saying this is not about Iran. This is not about. He gave an interview saying this is not about that. This is.
So the link is just a natural economic issue, but the politics is not.
The politics isn't linked, and I wonder how things would have shaken out differently had, either Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Iranian militias in Iraq, the Iraqi Shia Iranian proxy militias in Iraq, been satisfying these basic needs of their populace. Had they implemented good governance, would these people be lining up in the streets at all?
Right.
Would they be happy with that kind of governance?
Yeah.
When we look at it as, I think we need to look at this as entirely separate from the politics, as entirely separate from calling for political change in the sense.
Because the economy is the issue in terms of grievances and street protests, but the political change is a direct, it's the next step.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think the political situation, when you have any country that has entities within it, sub-state entities that are basically siphoning off the lifeblood, if you will, of the state, creating a state within a state, hollowing out the state, you will end up in situations like Iraq and Lebanon because the interest is elsewhere.
Right.
So it is part of the problem. I'm not sure if the people see it that way. Overall, I'm not saying there aren't those among them. I'm saying, are they when they're looking at their 6 points, even from a 50,000 foot view, are they saying, okay, the very existence of a non-state entity as a rival to the state within our country is part of the problem?
Right. And actually, that maybe is a nice way to kind of talk about a conversation we had before recording. Sure. And I think it was a nice introduction because you literally just picked me up and we're heading to our destination, and we had a conversation, which in hindsight was probably relevant to this episode. Yeah. I was in Lebanon the last 4 months, and I mean, it's been discussed thoroughly that the passion beyond Beirut, whether it was in Tripoli, in Antelias, in Nabati in the south, that unusual, the fact that there were people outside of the Beirut sphere challenging their own local, Nabati particularly against Hezbollah.
And Amal as well.
And Amal, and even, I mean, it just seemed for a few days that there really was change on the horizon, and it just, now it's clear that it's not going to happen overnight. But is that, in your mind, at least the beginning to what is necessary? That the fracture, where you're seeing Lebanese not talking in sectarian terms, and on TV at least, shouting against their sectarian overlord, saying, go. We don't care what you are, go. I mean,
is that planting the seed?
Is that, I mean, at least, how else do we get to the final stage, if not through that route?
Look, I think, I'm going to answer like a lawyer here, but it depends, right? I think, first of all, in the euphoria of the moment, and I try to look at Lebanon as dispassionately as possible. I think that's the only way to look at it, especially when you have a moment like this, where you care so much for the interests of the country, and you can kind of almost see salvation on the other side. You get too excited. And I think within that excitement, a lot of the nuance in these protests in the south and Nabati was missed. First of all, you had counter-protesters coming out who were pro-Hezbollah, pro-Amal. You had, there's talk of like the Wahra, right? The aura of Hezbollah's aura has been shattered. Maybe had, a lot of these people also not been forced to apologize either publicly or on TV, just like after the Hayya Silum incident in 2017. Within these protests also, you had very differing views on Hezbollah, on Amal. You had some saying, killun yani killun, except for Amal Hezbollah. You had some saying, some objecting to Hezbollah's political involvement in how it's run things in the government, but saying, no, don't touch the muqawamah, don't touch the resistance. And when you do that, Hezbollah as an entity, at least Hezbollah particularly, Amal is, for all intents and purposes, a spent force after Nabi Habirri dies, but Hezbollah, once you give it this breathing room, whatever it may be, you let it run chicken restaurants, it's going to find a way to reflourish again. And this is how it flourished in the 90s, where it was strictly a militia. And that was, the sphere that Syria and the Lebanese allowed it to operate in. But by the time the necessity for that ended with the end of the Israeli occupation, you had an entity too powerful for the state to control. So if you're going to say, as the protesters, well, end Hezbollah's political involvement, but leave the Muqawameh, but fine, Hezbollah has come into power from that point and has exerted influence on the government.
So you're saying even in that sense, it's just going back to the 90s at best. It's not going back to anything else. It's
and where it is going beyond that, there's a matter of sustainability. You need two things. You need critical mass of numbers, right? Anti-Hezbollah Shia are not a novelty. We've seen this before. They have existed. Even we saw them kind of in their protest votes in the last election. So you need critical mass of numbers, and you need a movement. You need something that's sustainable. If these people who are anti-Hezbollah are speaking out against it now, in the passion of the moment, where you have hundreds of thousands of people, thousands of people around you in the street, and they're all worked up, and Hezbollah's a little cowed. But then tomorrow it dies down, or tomorrow Hezbollah finds a way to crack down on you and that dies down, then what difference has it made? In fact, I think it rebounds the other way. And one thing that I saw that was kind of emblematic of this, there were these protesters near Majlis al-Junub, right? And they're walking down, and these pro-Hezbollah guys come at them, and they're like, go play your protest game elsewhere. You're anti-Muqawameh, and they're hitting them. And the protesters like, we have nothing against the Muqawameh. Right? So there's two ways to look at this. There's the way to look at it that these guys sincerely, the protesters sincerely are not anti-Muqawameh, which is a problem. The other way to look at it, which I think in some ways is equally problematic, is that the fear of Hezbollah still exists to the point where these people will say we are not anti-Muqawameh. We're like against everything else.
And even that word sometimes is, you can translate that word to mean any resistance in Lebanon. And oftentimes it's mostly the older resistance groups that sort of take pride in that name.
But so I think in this instance, it was
on Hezbollah's.
I mean, it's on Hezbollah's turf. The guys these are referring to, right?
But just these images of Hariri's posters being ripped from the wall in Tripoli, right?
Look, that's
they're really being torn away, and Tripoli did some brave steps on its own. Nabati was beginning that process, and it was crushed down. But is it just safe to say that the beginning started on October 17 of whatever's to come?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I don't know. I think it depends, right? If the backlash, again, if we look at Hayy al-Silm, that could have been a beginning, right? But you see how Hezbollah mobilized, and this is kind of look at it as Hayy al-Silm times 100 in terms of scale, but Hezbollah might be chastened, it might be kind of on the rebound, but it's not. They know how to deal with things like this. They know how to deal with it from threats within their community. So if they are able to manage, silence, quash, plug up the dam, do whatever they need to do, and do it in such a way like they did in Hayy al-Silm, where the full fist comes down.
Yeah, I just don't know any other way to overcome the long-standing issues that affect Lebanon. Other than that,
look, I agree with you. These problems and their solutions start at the grassroots.
Yeah,
the issue is sustainability, steam.
It took a long time for the average pro-Aoun supporter to be willing to challenge Aoun, and this happened.
Sure, but look,
October 2017, Aoun. I mean, Tayyar supporters were challenging this whole thing. They backtracked probably to a large degree, and today it's far less certain. But it was not easy to imagine Gibran Bassil being made fun of across the country by his own people. So I just don't know any other way to get to a better country.
It's the backtrack that worries me, and it's not just the backtrack. First, I mean, looking on Hariri, I would put. Even Amal, I'd put them all in one basket, and Hezbollah in another, because Hezbollah has this much more vast apparatus, particularly with violence. Right? They can and will use violence, and they have a media apparatus, and they have a social apparatus that they can bring down to shut people up. And you remember the guy who came out and cursed. but you're going to remember what happened to him. Sure. And if cursing didn't bring about change, then it's going to end up like the way, dictatorships end up, where you just don't speak up. You're so you remember the guy who spoke up as the guy who went to the gulag and disappeared, right?
That's true.
I'm making a little bit of an extreme example, but
let's take it just in a softer way.
Sure.
Of people were dealing with absurdity on October 16.
Yeah, the WhatsApp tax and different
fires and economic failure and real pain. But October 17, people moved on.
Sure.
And they said, we're not going to only remember this. We want to remember something else too. So it almost seems like both can happen. Backtracking, this October 17 moment may yield bad results in the short term. It's just hard for me to see getting to a better conclusion without at least testing these short-term,
I think we need to see how it plays out. And in principle, yes, this is the only way to bring about change. Without sustainability, though, it's just going to be a forgotten moment. And I think ultimately it might lead to this exhaustion. If, March 14th, the Cedar Revolution happened and it failed. This happened and it didn't go anywhere. People are at some point going to say, what can we do? We've tried. We've really tried to do the heavy lifting. And looking at it from Washington, D.C., it's not over, right? These people are largely in the streets, not in the numbers they were in early October. But it seems like also, I get little notifications on my phone of which street was blocked where. Those notifications have gone down, right? The street blocking has stopped. Without the street blocking, I get like the pro-government people are saying, you're preventing people from getting to their livelihood, whatever. But this is the mechanism of pressure. Yeah. So the pressure has somehow started to recede. Yeah. The Diab government is becoming normalized. And, I think Diab is playing it very smart, and that he's at least feigning responding to the people. Yeah. And if that gets them to a place where they say, okay, this is all we could get, then that's not a step forward. I think it's an illusory step forward with Diab in power. And
I really hope the exhaustion that you're describing, which I think all of us feel, whether we're observing it.
Well, I feel it from here.
Here, whether you're living through it there, and particularly now, this real exhaustion. Yeah. Almost this new form of exhaustion that's not, we don't know it. Yeah. It's too familiar in the Civil War years, but it shouldn't exist today. No. This kind of economic pain and uncertainty, which is unfair for Lebanese today. I hope all the sadness aside, that we both live long enough to see a Lebanon that at least is able to take care of its basic needs. Yes, because it almost seems like that is the fundamental issue. Even getting there is difficult. Yeah. But at least that seems to be a demand that's not going away. And it shouldn't. Yeah. And I hope it doesn't, because I think, look, a functioning Lebanon, even with the political mess in place, is a good starting point. And it's in our interest as the United States, and it's in the interest of our allies in the region. It's ultimately, more than anyone, it's in the interest of the Lebanese. That's true. But, we can't do it for them. We've tried. Perhaps not enough, but in points we have tried to help. Other regional actors have also tried to change things. It didn't work. So it's ultimately up to the Lebanese to fix their country. Well said. Thank you for your time, David. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. And a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.